Good afternoon. I think my task is really just to welcome our guests who came all the way from China to come and launch this institute, which I think it is quite important for the relationship, not just with the South African community, but with the African continent. The Confucius Institute, I think it is going to be a vehicle where we are going to use as South Africans to be able to take our relationship, whether it is economic, whether it is political, whether it is social, to the higher levels. After I spoke, we are going to be led by our two dignitaries, main dignitaries, Professor Ihron Rensburg. Professor Ihron Rensburg is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg. He has been the Vice Chancellor of University of Johannesburg for more than 10 years. So I am going to welcome Professor Rensburg to come forward to address us. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. I want to begin by saying what a special privilege it is to see so many of you, so many friends, colleagues. I'm looking for comrades as well. So I want to say that it's a very special privilege to look around the room and those who are sitting outside, that we have such a distinguished audience here this afternoon. It's a great privilege and a special honor for us as we today formally launch the University of Johannesburg's Confucius Institute in collaboration with our fine partner, the Nanjing Technological University. So allow me to acknowledge in particular then our very special guest. Let me also begin by acknowledging President Wang Wei of Nanyang Technological University. What am I of Nanjing Technological University. It's been a long time coming, Professor Wei. It's been some time in the making, and I just want to say what a special privilege it is for us to host you on this occasion, of course, together with your delegation. Allow me also to recognize the People's Republic of China's Embassy Deputy Consul General, responsible for education, also Deputy Consul, as well as the Minister for Education in the Chinese Embassy. It's a great honor to acknowledge you and to welcome you on this very special occasion. Allow me also to acknowledge the members of your delegation, President Wei, as well as members of the leadership team here at the University of Johannesburg. Let me also acknowledge the directors and the director and co-director of the UJ Confucius Institute, Professor Liu, as well as Dr. Monyai. Also allow me to recognize the directors and co-directors of our peer institutes, fellow Confucius Institutes at South African universities, these being Stellenbosch Rhodes, Durban University of Technology, University of Cape Town. And so today we launched the 5th such institute then here, in this instance, at the University of Johannesburg. Allow me also to recognize the directors of the Chinese community here in Johannesburg, who are good friends and partners of the university. And in particular, let me acknowledge our academics, fellow academics and colleagues. Prof. Stremler, warm welcome to you and many of our colleagues who have been able to find time to come and join us on this very special occasion. We do not take your presence lightly nor for granted. Thank you very much, all of you, for finding time to come and join us. And so, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this launch day of what we simply call UJIS, University of Johannesburg's Confucius Institute. And so for the record, the Institute was established as early as July of 2014 as a joint venture between the University of Johannesburg and Nanjing Technological University, NTU, and of course the Confucius Institute headquarters known as Hanban, with the aim of facilitating initially language teaching, cultural exchanges, and public diplomacy intended to deepen Sino-South African relations. The implementation of the agreement that President Wang Wei, Hanban, and I were privileged to sign have 5 broad pillars which guide our partnerships, and these relate to initiating a Mandarin program, conducting HSK assessments, consultations between our governments and with our governments, hosting Chinese events to promote Chinese culture, and conducting a so-called Chinese Bridge program. Allow me to make some brief remarks on Sino-Africa relations, which have grown in leaps and bounds over the last decades as China's emerged as the 2nd largest economy of the world, and presumably not for long the 2nd largest. Equally, the strategic partnership has reflected efforts to strengthen South-South relations between China, the world's largest developing nation, and Africa, which of course, as a matter of interest, has the highest concentration of developing nations, something that we easily forget because the image often is that Africa is one nation state, when in fact it is simply not the case. In addition to our long-standing historical bonds, Sino-African relations are increasingly underwritten by friendship and partnership, and a word that I struggle with, stumble over, brotherhood. With the establishment of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC, in the new millennium, the relationships have been elevated quite significantly. And through its triennial meetings, FOCAC has made significant contributions, we believe, to consolidating the traditional friendship, deepening mutual strategic trust, and pushing forward pragmatic cooperation in many areas. In addition to trade and investment that seek to boost African prosperity and development, the hallmarks of Sino-Africa relations in recent years have been the frequent exchanges of high-level visits between the two sides. Senior Chinese leaders, including General Secretary Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang, among others, have undertaken numerous official visits to Africa to underscore the depth of this cooperation. And for their part, African leaders have reciprocated through various official visits to China. And following the FOCAC summits in Beijing in early 2006 and Sharm el-Sheikh in 2009, China announced a raft of commitments to Africa, including debt cancellation, concessionary loans, and encouragement of Chinese companies to significantly increase the scale of their investments in Africa. And of course, this effort has drawn much critique from Western peer nations, particularly the United States, who of course are also seeking to advance its own interests on on the continent alongside China. As a result of these efforts, Sino-African economic and trade cooperation has burgeoned, making China now Africa's largest trading partner. And for instance, in 2008, the record shows that China-Africa trade volume reached $106 billion, up 45% already in 1 year, according to Chinese government statistics. In the same year, China's foreign direct investment in Africa exceeded $5 billion, and the China-Africa Fund has invested now $400 million in 20 projects, bringing cumulative investment by Chinese enterprises to about $2 billion. And in the meanwhile, China-Africa trade has expanded to more than $200 billion in 2013, and during his recent Africa visit, Premier Li Keqiang envisioned that bilateral trade between China and Africa will double to $400 billion by 2020. Beyond trade and investment, China is engaged in efforts to bring peace and security in Africa, with Chinese peacekeepers playing significant roles in Africa's conflict regions. Allow me to make some brief remarks on South Africa-China relations. And since the establishment of diplomatic relations and following on the establishment of the Democratic Republic of South Africa in 1994, China and South Africa have become important and firm allies in the political, economic, and social realms. Of course, also not without criticism, both from within the country, in particular the academic community, but also from without. And South Africa's recent membership in the Brazil, Russia, and China countries, expanded now to BRICS, has further deepened this strategic relationship. China is consistently engaged with South Africa because South Africa, of course, is the most industrialized economy on the African continent. And it plays, more importantly, a strategic and critical leadership role in Africa, or it is at least expected to play a strategic and critical leadership role in Africa. And of course, South Africa is the gateway to the vast Southern African development community. South Africa is also understood to hold the largest population of Chinese in Africa, who migrated in various successive waves beginning at the advent of the 20th century, with population estimates as low as 300,000 and as high as 500,000. And of course, Johannesburg, the epicenter of Africa's Chinese community. Over the past 4 years, China has become South Africa's most significant trading partner, both in terms of exports and imports. So, for example, whereas in 2012 trade between the two countries amounted to 201 billion rands, as things stand, South Africa's trade with China, 40% of South Africa's trade, 40% of South Africa's exports makes these days its way to China. And so South Africa finds itself in an extraordinary position where the North is going through still struggling through its economic crisis, precipitated by a financial crisis in 2008. And on the other hand, China is also now struggling with excess capacity, excess manufacturing capacity. And so when China sneezes and the North sneezes, South Africa catches a serious inflammatory stomach disease. And so that is therefore both the virtue but also the downside of having such significant partners and partnerships. As we know, the most popular sectors for Chinese business in South Africa include mining, finance, and infrastructure development. Since 2008, 3 of South Africa's largest banks have also formed partnerships with Chinese banks, and we know who those banks are: Standard, First National, as well as Nedbank. And according to the Department of Trade and Industry of South Africa, about 70 billion rands was spent on Chinese imports between January to June of 2013, and clearly that has grown even further. Alongside China's expansion of trade and investment in South Africa, there are growing efforts to expand the investment opportunities of South African companies in Chinese markets. I don't think we must forget that responsibility as well. And since 2014, more than 60 South African companies have visited China to explore joint collaborative opportunities with their Chinese counterparts, and one hopes also to make use or to mobilize the resources that have been made available in the various China-Africa agreements. These efforts have been spurred by the need to rebalance the nature of South Africa's burgeoning trade ties with China and to make them sustainable over the longer term. Similarly, China recently announced plans to finance local beneficiation through the development of a metallurgical complex in Limpopo province. And this is part of a new move aimed at employment-generating investment for South Africans. With respect to cultural exchanges, amongst others, according to the Chinese embassy here in Pretoria, China currently sends 100,000 tourists to South Africa and approximately 1,000 students annually. We hope that in our collaboration with Nanjing Tech, we will be able to grow that flow of Chinese students, in particular, between our two beautiful nations. Allow me then, as I work towards closure, to speak about the centrality of the city of Johannesburg. As the commercial hub of South Africa and Africa as a whole, Johannesburg epitomizes the growing commercial ties that are at the core of South Africa-China relationships. With our diverse, and I say our, Johannesburg, with our diverse commercial possibilities, always kind of stumble over this because I'm a chap from the coast, Port Elizabeth. But I've been here in Johannesburg since 1989. And so I have to say, with our diverse commercial possibilities here in Johannesburg, we have over the years provided a particularly rich and diverse hub of Chinese commercial activities, captured in the often criticized phenomenon of South Africa's China malls, such as Dragon City, China Mall, China Mart, and China City. Now, the mushrooming of these Chinese commercial nodes here in Johannesburg do illustrate the high demand for lower price but higher value, or value for money, Chinese supplies in South Africa, and potentially provides the site for entrepreneurship that, if engaged more astutely, can benefit local communities more directly. In another apt demonstration of the centrality of Johannesburg, a Chinese company, as we know, Zendai, under the stewardship of the inimitable Mr. Dai Zhikang, began the construction of the $8 billion smart city in Modderfontein, just here in East Johannesburg in 2013, billed as the future capital of Africa that will be on par with similar developments in New York and in Hong Kong. As one of the largest single foreign direct investments in South Africa, this smart city hopes to provide jobs for more than 100,000 people and house about 100,000 more upon completion. You're probably wondering, why am I doing this speech, right? Why am I trying to sell? Why am I trying to talk China up? Well, I'm trying to situate the launch of this Confucius Institute as perhaps far more important, and I say this with great respect and with great humility, in respect of our peer institutions and their Confucius Institute. I say it with great humility, that perhaps this Confucius Institute is even more central and more fundamental to, given its location, far more fundamental, critical, and important to nurturing a China-South Africa, a China-Africa relationship that is robust at the intellectual, academic level, one that provides for critical and constructive reflection on the challenges that face our world at this time and going into the future. And so I offer then that as one simple reason for making the case that the institute that we launched today is expected to play a far more significant role than perhaps the founders themselves had imagined this institute's role should be into the future. And finally then, on the role of UJIS, or the University of Johannesburg Confucius Institute. Besides teaching Mandarin, the University of Johannesburg and Nanjing Tech University are looking forward to seeing more rigorous academic research and advisory inputs from our two co-directors, Dr. David Monyai and Professor Liu Zhanghao and their team. The main aim of UJIS is first and foremost to give effect to existing Memorandum of Agreement signed in 2014, and we expect to see more activities carried out by the Institute to strengthen the partnership between the two universities through exchange programs, student-staff collaboration between our two institutions, seminars. One of the ideas that Professor Wee has asked us to pursue, by way of example, this morning in our conversations, is a BRICS university seminar or symposium dealing with the critical issues confronting our world at this time, such as energy, but also materials and artificial intelligence. We were excited by the idea, and we expect to take it forward jointly, possibly with co-hosting such an event here at the University of Johannesburg later this year. We also expected to take our work forward. This is through the Institute, through cultural exchanges, through conferencing, through, as Professor Marwala would insist, increased publication in accredited journals coming out of this institute, and the expansion of all of these activities involving all of the faculties at the University of Johannesburg. You probably would want to hear, so what has happened here? In terms of work already undertaken, it's worth noting that in 2015, the Confucius Institute already had 357 students registered and undertaking Mandarin teaching. Last year, the CI organized 14 cultural activities, which positively help South African people engage about, struggle with their meaning, their understanding of China and Chinese culture. And the number of people who have attended these events have exceeded 5,000. Last year, to celebrate the China Year in South Africa and to strengthen mutual understanding between China and South Africa and between its people, the Institute hosted over an 18-day period a panoramic epic painting exhibition in salute of Mandela by the Chinese artist Li Bin. It's also worth noting in this regard that we, at the same time as we had the exhibition, we hosted an academic seminar at its close on the topic Art, Democracy, Diplomacy, and the Limits of Representation, Critical Reflections on Li Bin's Mandela. So a lot of activity already underway, and one of the delights, Professor Wee, one of the great delights of this occasion is that we do not cut the ribbon on something which must come. We are cutting the ribbon on something which has already been born, which has already been given life to. And for that, I want to begin by extending sincere appreciation to Dr. Mechwe, who struggled with me and who worked closely with me and colleagues in the Hanban Institute, and subsequently with Professor Wee and his team. Thank you very much, Dr. Mechwe. I also want to thank the team on this side of UJ who initiated the work, got it going, Professor Alban Burke, I think Alban must be around here, as well as Professor Lionel Posthumus, and then of course the two co-directors who are really inspiring us, challenging us, and who are taking the work forward, Professor Liu and Dr. Monyai, We wish you only the very, very best as you go forward. You can rely on our full and active support in this very important journey. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.